The red-haired witch, finding herself in a stressful situation, rushed to the doll in order to save her life. However, the monster behind her was in no hurry to attack the girl and suddenly spoke. It turned out to be Dae Sung. Looking at him, Ryu-sun could not understand what was happening and why he was like that. However, the guy had no desire to explain it to her now and ordered her to follow him. The next moment, he touched the ground with his mighty paw and released a fraction of his aura, causing the ground to crack at the seam in the middle of the maze. Soon, a dark tunnel leading into the unknown opened in front of the Ryobats, but the great Dae Sung had nothing to do with it. There was a frantic rumble in the huge dungeon, and soon a horned skull began to appear from the ground. Just a few seconds later, the infernal monster ascended. At the same time, a new notification appeared in front of Dae Sung, which gave him a new task, the purpose of which was to defeat the Ghost King who was infected with a celestial particle. The guys carefully watched the crazy monster from around the corner, and soon the ruler of Hell declared that they were too late. The demon was tormented by an invisible voice that ordered him to repent in order to hear the doctrine of the supreme heavens. Unable to withstand such a strong onslaught, the monster went crazy and beat its head against the floor with all its might. Watching this picture, Dae Sung in the guise of a guard stated that the Ghost King had already completely become a puppet of the heavenly bastards, and killing his body possessed by intercepting the soul was still a gemmer. After that, he looked at his wonderful student with great interest. Without thinking twice, he demanded the system to show him the skills of a servant, and among the abilities he was interested in was the skill Instant Death, which consumes 99% of vitality and magic, creating a small probability of killing the enemy. However, in case of bad luck, the skill leads to the instant death of the caster. This is exactly what the ruler of Hell needed. Without hesitation, the executioner gives 2 points to instant death. Suddenly, the half-naked witch was enveloped in powerful energy, and the girl did not understand what was happening. Also, a notification popped up in front of her saying that the level of the instant death skill had been increased and now the chance of successful application was increased, and most importantly, the failure of such a dangerous ability would only lead to loss of consciousness. The Lord of Hell asked Ryu-sun to be quiet and explained to her that he had just raised the level of her strongest ability. The girl did not expect that this was possible. Looking at her palm, the red-haired witch declared that she felt much stronger. Now Dae Sung wanted the girl to use her fawn on the monster that was hitting the ground with her head, but Ryu-sun was not sure of her abilities since the opponent in front of her looked very impressive. At the same time, the Lord of Hell gave her a thumbs up telling her that everything would work out. At the same time, the witch got up from her knees and crossed her arms, after which she took one of her dolls and began to imbue it with demonic energy. Looking at this tricky process, Dae Sung prayed that she would succeed, otherwise he would have a hard time. At the same moment, Ryu-sun pierces the head of the linen doll with a needle and pronounces the name of the ability Instant Death. At the same time, the monster's skull was illuminated by a purple light and soon the lifeless thicket plopped to the ground. Seeing this, the guy was frantically glad that everything worked out, but he suddenly heard another slap and with fear in his hellish eyes he turned his head. Turning around, he saw Ryu-sun lying in front of him, and that could only mean one thing: it didn't fucking work out. The infected Ghost King came to his senses and began to rise, seeing that Dae Sung in someone else's guise used a full buff, and took out his legendary sword from the inventory. The two monsters stood on top of each other, and exuded incredible energy, and soon the ruler of Hell used another of his blood naturalization skills. The Ghost King also did not stand idly by and hurried to get his bone sword. When Dae Sung saw this, he rushed into battle. He was surprised that this bastard had called the Blade of Sin to deal with him, and now the ruler of Hell demanded that the Ghost King die obediently. Soon, their mighty swords clashed, and the battlefield was filled with flying sparks and their boundless energy, when suddenly Dae Sung's sword flew out of his hands and went into free flight. At the same moment, the bone blade pierced into fresh flesh and the dungeon was sprinkled with blood. The ruler of Hell was embarrassed by this outcome, and even through the mask one could see his tense face. But the Ghost King wasn't going to stop there and instantly used a skill called Absorbing a Living Soul. After that, the body of the defeated Dae Sung gradually began to disappear. The great ruler of Hell was in the process of being devoured by a pathetic bug and his last words were obscene language. Soon, the strongest hunter and concurrently the ruler of Hell disappeared from this world without a trace. However, even being inside the sword, his angry words reached the soulless monster. Meanwhile, a black car was driving at full speed through the busy streets of the city. Shinchon, adjusting her cap, asked the guy in the bathrobe for forgiveness for not being able to warn him that she decided to take another person with her. Jevu was embarrassed by such sudden news and in response asked, "Who is it?" At the same time, the guys in the underground parking lot were illuminated by a bright light. A black car drove up to the white car and parked there. Soon an unknown figure in dark shoes got out of the car. The uninvited guest turned out to be none other than Cho Hanul, the leader of the Marble Clan. The girl introduced a friend who had arrived in front of the scientist, and stated that the leader of the Marble Clan also intends to cooperate with Professor Park Dong-hak. Jev unhurriedly said that this should have been reported in advance. At the same time, the guy in the mask did not wait and introduced himself properly, and he also stated that he sincerely admired Professor Park Dong-hak as a fellow engineer in the field of aura. Elder Hans, who was hiding behind the name of Jevu, was confused. He did not expect such a large fish to fall into his lair. At this time, Cho Hanul wasted no time and also greeted the leader Chang Ho, but the guy in the dark jacket got confused and forgot that he was the leader of the clan. The black-haired man in the mask also waved at Shinchon, to which she only nodded slightly. The blue-eyed woman turned to the subordinate of such a famous professor. She said that from now on everyone is assembled and therefore she asks to take them to Park Dong-hak. Or does she need to contact him directly? Elder Hans did not expect that this bitch would have such a good feel and she would take a backup with her. From now on he intends to decompose this bitch into pieces and turn her into a monster. Without thinking twice, Jevu announced that there would be no problems with this and most likely the professor would be very happy. Soon, the guy in the white coat brought his companions to the research room and asked them to wait a little while for the professor to come. After these words, Jevu turned around and left the room. The metal doors slammed shut behind him with a characteristic sound. However, this did not bother Chang Ho much, because he was more afraid of cans with unknown contents. Cho Hanul disturbed the guys and handed them the developed aura protectors. The masked man warned that these red bracelets should be worn on the wrist. The leader of the Dae Sung clan was pleasantly surprised by such a gift, and Shin Cho-young also hurried to thank the guy in the mask. Soon, Blue-Eyed said that it was her leader Huang Zhenyan who advised that, just in case, for the sake of safety, it was worth taking Cho Hanul with you. After hearing this, Chang Ho took hold of the top of his head and forgot that he could ask the leader of the Marble Clan for help with weapon modification. Suddenly, gas began to flow rapidly from the ventilation into the laboratory. The guys looked at the ceiling in surprise at a time when the gas had already completely filled the room. At the same time, the masked man worriedly announced that it was a trap. After hearing this, Shinchon and the guy in the jacket froze in surprise. Frantic knocks could be heard through the locked door, and soon, with an effort, the leader of the Marble Clan was still able to knock it out, but Chang Ho, coming out of the poisonous fog, realized that it was not so bad there. There were angry orcs in front of the hunters who were screaming in anger, but Cho Hanul did not lose his head and pulled out his blade without hesitation. He was ready to confront the huge monsters and protect those two behind his back. One of the monsters was already ready to deliver its fatal blow to the motionless black-haired guy in the mask. Suddenly, Cho Hanul painted several orcs with incredible speed, after which he stretched out his hand, from which warm light gradually began to flow. From such incredible firepower, the hunter's clothes literally began to evaporate, but the result was worth it. The fire ray illuminated his opponents. The orcs did not even have time to realize their death, but alas, their bodies were cut in two. Such is the strength of the leader of the Marble Clan named Cho Hanul. The guys hurried to their mighty savior with words of gratitude, but Cho Hanul was worried about the incredible stench that permeated the laboratory. Elder Hans and a part-time mad scientist were closely watching everything that was happening. Despite the fact that the intruders had not yet been defeated, a smile shone on his face because those who inhaled this gas would not be able to escape from his creatures. Now he's going to test stronger freaks. Meanwhile, inside the Blade of Sin, there is a place called the Field of Souls. Thousands of faceless beings were begging for their salvation, when suddenly one of the crowd tremblingly raised his hand and with the same voice notified his fellow non-members that a new soul had arrived. The sinners rushed to the newcomer in a crowd in order to feast on fresh meat, but despite hundreds of frightening and dragging creatures, the unknown continued to stand quietly. The monsters were getting closer with every passing moment, and when the distance reached the peak, the Lord of Hell spoke. Apparently the faceless creatures were still unaware of who was standing in front of them. The sinners were far mistaken, because they will be the dinner. Apparently, the guys did not expect such a turn of events. Meanwhile, the Ghost King who had swallowed Han Dae Sung was slowly dragging his sword through the dungeon. when suddenly he stopped in front of the half-naked and defenseless Ryuson. Without a doubt, the monster raised his sword and was about to pierce the girl, when suddenly he was stunned by a strange phenomenon. The bone sword in his hands turned over and its tip pointed at its owner. The Ghost King cursed the scoundrel and demanded to stop it. At the same time, Dae Sung's arrogant voice reached him from the sword, who was surprised that the monster had not yet realized what position he was in. At the same time, even droplets of sweat began to stand out from the bone skull, after which the monster was defeated by its own sword. In anger at such a shameful loss, the Ghost King rolled his eyes to the sky, and soon after he committed seppuku, he began to gradually disappear. An unusual bone sword that killed its own master crashed to the ground with a crash. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of the ruler of Hell, notifying him of the completion of this location. As a reward for this feat, 100,000 merit points were credited to him and another servant's skill point was awarded. After getting out of the field of souls, the black-haired man scratched his head and was indignant that there would definitely be some kind of hemorrhoids in each such quest. However, his words brought new adventures upon him, and an unknown yellow energy began to flow from under the res hot. Having seen this, the ruler of Hell realized with annoyance that the test was not over yet. A female silhouette appeared in front of him who wanted to know who this black-haired nobody was. A notification appeared in front of Dae Sung again, which wanted the guy to settle the law of causality, and for this he should deal with the celestial inhabitant. The ruler of Hell was in no hurry to introduce himself and gave this opportunity to the unknown, because it was she who broke into someone else's house. Raising her hand, she asked again, is he really the ruler who stands over these mindless, insignificant creatures? Without waiting for a response from the black-haired guy, she dealt him a powerful blow demanding to repent of his sins. However, the demon somehow mysteriously avoided this attack, from which the heavenly resident was amazed. Suddenly, yellow-bodied, without having time to utter a word, noticed the radiance that rushed through her right arm. The next moment her heavenly limb rotted into oblivion. After seeing such an amazing sight, the demons imprisoned in pandemonium praised their demonic god and begged him to take revenge on the heavens and wash away their shame. Dae Sung was already quite tired of the buzzing of these mosquitoes. He was going to deal with her without their advice. A celestial resident who was brought to her knees wondered how an unknown person, even without being the main deity, could communicate with the demonic beasts of the abyss. The words she uttered interested the blue-eyed guy, and he asked again, what kind of main deity is this? Suddenly, golden chains shrouded in a light aura appeared out of nowhere and enveloped the helpless celestial. Seeing the heavenly apostles behind her, the girl began to beg for her forgiveness and repent of her mistake, but the decision of the Almighty was unchanged. Their scarlet eyes symbolized her sentence. Dae Sung looked arrogantly at the new guests and asked what they were doing. But the heavenly apostles were in no hurry to answer the black-haired guy's question and announced to the woman that for violating the law, she would be exterminated. Seeing that the three scoundrels decided to ignore him, the ruler of Hell was angry, from which he grabbed his blade tighter and tore on his demonic wings to the apostles. The heavenly creatures were stunned in horror by the impending threat. A barely noticeable ray of light flew past the three creatures, and the next moment, the cut parts of the apostles began to fall to the ground. The celestial resident, who was bound with golden chains, watched this terrifying power from the side. The only way she could explain what happened was that the apostles were simply weak. The defeated bodies emitting warm light began to gradually evaporate in the atmosphere. As soon as the apostles finally evaporated, the wound of the heavenly virgin opened, and blood gushed out from her in a powerful stream, from which she screamed in pain. A new notification appeared in front of the ruler of Hell, which congratulated the guy on the successful completion of the task and notified him that the realization of the possessions of the Ghost King had reached 100%, as well as the heavenly inhabitant ceased to exist, and the Ghost King and his troops came under the command of Dae Sung. The dimmed and bleeding young lady fixed her gaze on heaven on her knees. The light surrounding her was losing its strength every second, and the girl could not believe she was rejected by the main deity and banished from heaven. In the next moment, the power began to leave her rapidly, from which the woman twisted in pain and began to cry furiously. Soon, a defenseless little kid was lying in the place of the former celestial inhabitant. The black-haired one was watching everything that was happening and could not understand what the hell had just happened. The only explanation was that the screenwriters were smoking something. And it turned out to be true. In front of the great Dae Sung, instead of a crying child, there was already an egg. After looking at this, he now had no questions for the developers at all. but the guy did not know what to do with this egg now. The first thing that came to the demon lord's mind was to smash him by force. Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of him congratulating him on acquiring the heavenly egg and warning him that he could be transformed into a demonic beast that would kindly obey him. Without thinking twice, the black-haired man decided to start the process of demonic transformation, after which the egg in Han Dae Sung's hand glowed furiously. Soon, a table appeared above the flaming shell from the system that notified about the transformation process. The black-haired guy had no other option but to try to understand something after the transformation was over. Meanwhile, a rusty sign warning of radioactive danger hung at one of the iron doors. Suddenly the metal door slammed shut with terrible force and sound. All this was happening in front of the guys who were under the protection of the leader of the Marble Clan, straightening his tie. Chan Ho indignantly trying to understand what was the point of all this. At the same time, Shin Cho-young replied that the most obvious thing was that Professor Park Dun-hyuk was in trouble. Suddenly, Cho Hanul slowly raised his left hand, thereby attracting the attention of his real allies. Looking higher, the guy in the mask discovered a two-headed monster above him who stood on the corporate ladder. The black-haired head coming from the monster's body was choking with saliva. The monster was very happy to meet delicious and fresh hunters. A huge ogre with an iron bulge dared in front of the guys, but it was an unusual ogre because a human head came from the monster's body. Chang Ho and Shin Cho-young saw this for the first time and could not understand what it was. At the same time, with horror in his eyes, the masked guy worriedly said that this was an experiment in merging a monster with a human. Meanwhile, the crazy black-haired head noticed that the girl among the guys is pretty enough, and he hopes that she will become a head next to him. Shin Cho-young did not appreciate such a compliment from the man and took out her pistol, after which a hail of bullets rained down on the chimera. However, this attack did not show up on the monster's condition in any way, and the black-haired man could not understand why all these tingling. At the same time, Cho Hanul disappeared from his place, leaving an invisible trace. The leader of the Marble Clan rushed to attack the vile chimera. After blocking the attack, the monster was outraged and did not understand what kind of cowardly attack it was without warning. However, Cho Hanul did not react to the words of the monster, and again put his hand forward. At the same moment, one of the ogre's heads shattered into pieces, while the remaining head flew into a rage. She did not understand how some little man dared to kill his pet. The leader of the Marble Clan stepped back a little from the enraged monster, gripping his deadly weapon tighter. The black-haired monster was going to crush the pathetic insects in front of him. The guy in the mask, not listening to empty threats, rushed into battle again, but suddenly Morgenstern flies out of nowhere at Cho Hanul. With the help of his deadly weapon, the one-headed monster easily pins the leader of the Marble Clan into the wall. Having collapsed, Cho Hanul was lying at the foot of the wall, and the monster was not going to miss his chance to crush one of the bugs. However, at the last moment, the guy in the mask disappears from under the blow, thereby saving his life. Suddenly a hail of bullets rained down on the monster again. The reason for this was the same Shinchon with a gun. Looking at the cutie, the black-haired man decides that he will still need to ask the professor to attach his new partner's head. Meanwhile, Ryu Son was curiously examining the strange egg in Han Dae Sung's hands, when suddenly its shell cracked and bright light poured out of it. Soon the egg completely disintegrated into particles, and the Inferno witch happily informed her teacher that something had hatched. A creature previously unknown to them levitated in front of the guys, and soon the flying fairy turned to Ryu Son with the question, "Is she her mistress?" Han Dae Sung interrupted her and demanded that the flying moth tell him everything she knows about heaven faster. However, the magical creature apologized and stated that she had no memories related to heaven. At the same time, disappointed that he had spent so much time for some useless moth, the ruler of hell slowly began to draw his sword. However, suddenly Ryu Son intervened in the dialogue, who asked her master not to kill this creature. She herself would not mind raising this pet, but the guy did not understand what nonsense she was talking about. At the same time, the Inferno witch began to whisper to her new girlfriend with a request to show something useful to the teacher, the only way she could stay alive. Without thinking twice, the pet objected and remembered that she had a heavenly store. Suddenly, a counter appeared out of nowhere in space, and when Ryu Son saw it, she was very surprised, but Han Dae Sung did not even know what to say. A real shop for hunters appeared in front of them. There were various potions and artifacts on the windows and shelves, and in front of the guys themselves there was a huge selection of ranged weapons. After walking a little down the rows, Han Dae Sung noticed a strange object and called the moth to tell her what it was in more detail. Flying closer, The hatched pet began to tell its owner that this is a one-time item that informs the user of important information about the coming future. An information window appeared in front of the ruler of Hell, which notified that the information provided by the Diary of the Future would be valid for 24 hours and it could be purchased only once a week for merit points. After reviewing all the details, the guy without hesitation decides to purchase this item. At the same time, a pen with papyrus flies up in front of His Majesty Han Dae Sung, and after a few moments several names appear on a piece of paper, namely Chan Ho, Shin Chon, Cho Hano. Seeing the names of close and familiar faces, the black-haired man woke up very much, when suddenly, because of what he had written, he tensed up and in earnest.